Hey, what is up, mortals? It is SBurkVA here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 17 of What If Deku Had a Regen Quirk. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. And so, we begin. It was the dead of night, and the students were participating in a test of courage. For the past 3 days, Midoriya had no bars, and therefore no contact with the outside world. It's not like he needed it, as Mandalay's telepathy quirk was enough to relay information from outside the wilderness. This is why it was a surprise to feel his phone vibrating in his pocket. Midoriya picked up his phone and saw that he only had a singular bar. The name of the caller plastered across the screen made Midoriya retreat behind a couple of trees for privacy. Hello, Melissa, did you find out what the SIM card?
Midoriya, evacuate the forest training camp.
Melissa, what's wrong? I can barely read you.
About to be kidnapped.
League of Villains? Kidnapping? What are you talking about?
Traitor, of course.
Midoriya looked down at his phone screen. He had no signal, causing the call to drop. He felt every muscle in his body tense. Something bad was about to happen, and he needed to do something before it was too late. Having no clue about what type of danger he was about to face, he barged into Aizawa's remedial class. Exasperated and slightly winded, Midoriya cried out, "I saw villains! In the forest!" The remedial class students all stood up from their seats, prepared to fight, but Aizawa commanded them to stay put. "Do not leave this room. Vlad, protect the students. Midoriya, lead me to where you saw the villains." The pair dashed out of the building and into the forest. Midoriya had no idea where he was leading Aizawa, but he couldn't just stay put after Melissa's warning. Aizawa suddenly spoke up. "What did the villains look like? How far away are we from them?" Midoriya had tried to swear off lying, but he just had to keep putting himself into incriminating situations. If he kept it up, he might have to join Alcoholics Anonymous equivalent for compulsive lying. He could imagine it now. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. The hero killer killed me and a quirk tried to, too." Well, after several months of lying, he must have gotten better at it. One villain was dressed in all black and his face was horribly disfigured with scars, and the other villain, he had a mask on, but he was acting crazy and deranged. We should be close to them soon, I think. That was terrible. Midoriya was praying that Aizawa wouldn't ask any follow-up questions. The man was like a human lie detector. A villain with facial scarring, a masked villain with mental issues. How did he even come up with that? No, really, how? The growing silence was painful. The sound of wind and leaves being crushed under their feet filled his ears. Voices in the distance are drowned out by the crunching of gravel. The pair stopped. There were 2 voices, maybe a third, further ahead. Aizawa protectively stood in front of Midoriya as he sneaked ahead. As they grew closer, their voices became clearer. Faces illuminated by a bright blue flame made Midoriya's heart skip a beat. Even Aizawa looked equally as shocked. A man with facial scarring under his eyes and on his jaw spoke. "Be ready to make some clones of me twice. We have about 5 minutes until we burn this place to the ground." Another man in a skin-tight black and white suit replied, "Why would I make a clone of a small fry like you? Of course, you're amazing, Dabi." Midoriya would think that luck was on his side if villains hadn't infiltrated the camp. Aizawa whispered, "Midoriya, give me 2 syringes of your blood." Midoriya frantically searched his pockets and his blood ran cold. He left them in his hero costume's utility belt. A second and a more terrifying realization hit him. He would have to fight off villains without any of his support weapons. No katanas, throwing knives, dart shooters, or blood vials. Seeing the look on Midoriya's face, Aizawa turned back to the villains. "I need you to go find Mandalay. Have her use her quirk to warn all of the students." Another voice suddenly spoke out. "Let me help you." Shinso panted as he leaned against a tree for support. He must have snuck out and followed them. Aizawa had a shocked look on his face. "I told you to stay in the classroom." Shinso retorted, "I want to be a hero too. I'm so far behind from everyone I couldn't just stay back where I know I can help out here." Aizawa must have been impressed by Shinso's tenacity as he didn't put up any more argument. Midoriya had already run off in a hurry. He didn't have time to see how their fight would play out. He ran as soon as the sound of arguing grew distant. Blue light raged on behind him. Consumed in the haze of panic, Midoriya had no idea how much time had actually passed until he ran directly into a body. Midoriya fell onto the floor and looked up, only to have the color drained from his face. That wasn't a quirk, he was just scared. Another villain. He was some sort of lizard mutant with purple hair, but that wasn't the oddest part. He was undeniably dressed in cosplay based on the hero killer. The lizard man wielded a large amalgamation of weapons in his hand as he peered down at Midoriya. "Hey! Watch it, kid." Without hesitation, the villain struck the ground where Midoriya lay, but the teen was able to roll out of the way in time. Out of habit, Midoriya reached for one of his katanas, but he forgot that he was completely unarmed. Another strike from the villain grazed against Midoriya's skin, and he barely dodged on time. Midoriya had become so accustomed to weapon usage that he'd become estranged from where he started out, physical brawling. The villain didn't seem to have a fighting-type quirk, which he compensated for by using a weapon, just like Midoriya. After another missed strike, the weapon became temporarily stuck in the ground. The villain visibly strained to lift it back up, and Midoriya took advantage of the opening. He drove his fist into the scaly face of his opponent, causing him to stumble backward. Now separated from his weapon, they were on equal standing. Midoriya didn't waste time and rushed in to deliver an uppercut, but the villain deflected with another weapon, a singular katana. Midoriya retracted his bleeding hand as two of his fingers regenerated to replace the ones that fell to the ground. Midoriya looked up, and the villain was suddenly gone. He looked all around at the trees that surrounded him, and his instincts told him to duck. Midoriya dropped to the ground and turned to see the villain crawling up a tree with a throwing knife held in his mouth. So he can climb vertical surfaces like a lizard too, good to know. Being hidden by the leaves of the trees above, the lizard villain rained down throwing knives. Midoriya used his arm to block his face, and several knives found themselves hilt deep in his flesh. He took cover behind some rocks and pulled each knife out of his forearm. At least now he was armed. Another wave of knives came down on Midoriya's hiding spot. The teen took notice of where the knives originated from and returned the weapons to sender. His accuracy must have been spot on as the villain loudly cried out and fell out of the tree with a crash. Midoriya hurried to the villain's side and grabbed onto the two ends of his crimson-red scarf. He rested his foot against the villain's back for more leverage and began to pull the scarf back, effectively choking the man. The villain helplessly clawed at his throat, but Midoriya wouldn't let up. If you want to live another day, you will tell me 3 things. 1, who are you and why did the League send you? 2, how many of you are there? 3, what do you know of a UA traitor? Of course, Midoriya wasn't actually going to kill the villain, but the villain didn't know that. After getting his demands out, he loosened the grip he had on the scarf. The villain gasped deeply and let out a weak sob. After a moment of regaining composure, the villain responded. I'm Spinner, a new recruit to the League, so I don't know everything. But they wanted us to attack the training camp to weaken public support of UA and heroes. Ow. We were also tasked with kidnapping you and a blonde villain-like kid. There's 9 of us out here right now, plus 1 Nomu. Spinner coughed and continued speaking. I'm actually a big fan of yours. It's really inspired by Stain's ideals. And when Shigaraki told me about the training he did with him... Spinner was cut off by Midoriya starting to choke him with his own scarf again. You didn't answer the last question. Who is the UA traitor? Before Spinner could respond, a giant magnet collided against Midoriya's back. This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN allows you to change your IP address, making it harder to track and securing your privacy. In addition to providing safe passage through the web, you can also expand the reach of your favorite streaming services like Disney+. If you're from the United States, you won't be able to watch any of the MCU and Sony Spider-Man movies. But by switching your location to Japan, you can access them whenever you want. Check out the link in the description to get 3 extra months when you purchase the 12-month subscription plan that costs $99.99 a year. This deal's for a limited time, and thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. Midoriya fell to the ground and several voices started approaching. Midoriya! Mandalay ran up with Tiger, Ragdoll, and Pixie Bob behind her. A new villain appeared behind Spinner, and the Pussycats leaped into action. Mandalay helped Midoriya up as he frantically spilled the information he knew. There are 9 villains here! They're attacking indiscriminately and also want to kidnap me and Kachan. Aizawa is alone, fighting against 2 villains by himself, and he needs help. Mandalay nodded and used her telepathy quirk to warn all the training camp students. Students, there are villains who have infiltrated the training camp. Do not engage and get to safety. They're also planning on kidnapping your classmates, so protect Katsuki Bakugo and Izuku Midoriya. After relaying her message, she suddenly had a look of terror. Wait, where's Koda? Midoriya, please, I need you to find him and bring him to safety while we take down these villains. Midoriya nodded and ran off into the forest. He had no idea where Koda might be, and all he could do was hope that no villains had found him first. Midoriya ran as fast as his body could take him. He searched every room of the campsite buildings and the area around them, but he was nowhere to be seen. He must have snuck off somewhere else. Midoriya looked at the forest. There was a blue fire spreading over the left, and a weird pink haze was emanating to the right. And various attacks caused rumbling and explosions all over the place. Everything was chaotic, and there was no way he could find Koda in that mess. He couldn't see into the forest from his current angle, so it would be smart to get to a vantage point. Midoriya looked around and found a good cliff that overlooked the entire forest, so he ran to climb the mountain trail. When he arrived at the top, what he saw made his heart drop. A blonde villain with muscle fibers covering his arms stood menacingly over a sobbing Koda. He hadn't laid a finger on the kid, but there was no doubt that he had murderous intent, and wouldn't hesitate to kill Koda. Midoriya's body moved on its own, his abused muscles pushing him towards Koda. He had to save him. Midoriya protectively grabbed the back of Koda's shirt and pulled the kid back and behind himself. Midoriya ordered, Koda, go back to the campsite! Koda was frozen in fear. Something about this villain had the kid's feet firmly planted to the ground as he shook uncontrollably. The villain looked at Midoriya with intrigue. The villain laughed and spoke. You're on the list. Shigaraki said he wanted you dead or alive, so that means I get to have some fun with you. Despite the villain's bulky frame, he moved fast, much faster than Midoriya anticipated, as he was promptly kicked in the abdomen and sent flying into a rocky wall of the mountain. Midoriya pushed the rubble off of himself and he moved to stand up out of the crater he formed, but Muscular had other plans. He planted his fist directly into the teen's stomach, crushing him between the rocks and several tons of force behind his fist. He then punched again and again. Midoriya was effectively stuck in place, being mercilessly beat down on by a maniacal villain. A normal person would be dead by now, but Midoriya clung onto consciousness with a vice grip. Muscular only laughed with an amused smile. He must know that Midoriya's quirk was regeneration, because he was clearly having fun with his semi-indestructible punching bag. Koda was terrified, but the display taking place in front of him spurred him to action. He threw a rock at the back of Muscular's head. That was enough to divert the villain's attention away from his target. Koda took several hesitant steps back, but Muscular's stare was enough to send the fear of death through his core. Muscular moved towards Koda with his fist clenched, ready to deliver a devastating blow. Midoriya couldn't let that happen. Muscular's muscle fiber-coated arm flexed as his fist moved at top speed towards Koda's face, but it didn't collide with its intended target. Midoriya tackled Koda out of the way, causing the teen to be punched directly in the spine. Midoriya's nerves tingled like he had been hit with an electric shock, and his muscles twitched from the nerve trauma. Koda had been protected from the attack as he lay safe in Midoriya's arms, passed out from the shock. He gently placed the kid down and turned back to Muscular. The villain no longer had a playful smile on his face as he now looked more annoyed. More muscle fibers stacked over his arm, and he rushed Midoriya faster than he previously was. A single punch was enough to generate wind pressure that threatened to push Midoriya off of the cliffside. The unconscious body of Koda teetered dangerously close. Midoriya stood between Muscular and Koda, feet planted and unwilling to move. The villain went in for another attack and Midoriya grappled with him. Every muscle in his body was tearing with strain, but his strength was incomparable to Muscular's. The villain easily overpowered Midoriya and pinned him to the ground. His large hand grabbed onto the teen's face and lifted him up with ease. Midoriya was blinded by the palm over his eyes, but he could see a sliver of Muscular's face through his fingers. The villain's hand flexed, and his skull began to feel tight. Muscle fibers laid over the already strong hand, and Midoriya heard cracking from within his ears. His vision was turning red, and his muscles stopped thrashing around. Everything in his head was excruciatingly tight until he didn't feel anything anymore. No, he can't just be taken down so easily. He needs to get up right now to protect Koda. He does not have 30 minutes to fuck around in Immortal Brainland. He needs to get up again. He needs to save Koda. Muscular laughed as he dropped Midoriya's presumably dead body to the ground. He wiped his bloody palm against his already crimson shirt. He stepped over the decapitated body and walked over to Koda. The kid's eyes were peacefully closed, ignorant to the danger that approached him. Behind Muscular, though, Midoriya's hand twitched. Flesh, bone, and blood squirted out from his neck. His body began moving to stand up. His face reformed, with muscle fibers weaving together to cover the skull pieces that connected together like puzzle pieces. White eyeballs oozed back into his eye sockets, and green irises moved to look at Muscular. The villain had picked up Koda by the collar. With a not yet fully regenerated brain, Midoriya ran and delivered the strongest punches his body could muster against the villain's back. His body functioned purely out of instinct alone, fight or flight controlling his every action. His attacks collided against the muscle fibers that coated the villain, but were unfortunately ineffective. Muscular dropped Koda as rage surged through his body. He yelled out, "Why don't you just stay down?" He backhanded Midoriya and his body rolled against the ground, now being fully healed. Midoriya stood back up and ran back in again. Muscular was no longer enjoying the fight. It was like trying to kill a mosquito that keeps landing on you. Every time you smack it, it just keeps flying back at you. Midoriya found himself back in that all-too-familiar alleyway soon, but with the blink of an eye, he was back to fighting. He kept cycling between death and life so many times that he no longer remembered how many times he came back. He just kept throwing himself back into the fight. He was exhausted, but he couldn't stop. He had to protect Koda. Wait a minute, where was Koda? Midoriya had been so consumed in the fight that he hadn't noticed where Koda had gone. Did he fall off the cliff? Did he run away? Did Muscular do something while he was temporarily dead? Speaking of that villain, Muscular seemed to have snapped, and he finally cried out, "I'm taking you alive then!" The villain wrapped his hands in muscle fibers as he grabbed Midoriya. The teen thrashed violently to try and escape, but layers of muscles restrained his body like rope. Muscular jumped off of the cliff with Midoriya in tow and landed safely. Midoriya tried to scream, but his mouth was covered. The villain ran until he encountered a man with a trench coat, top hat, and mask. Muscular ordered. I got one of the kids. Marble him before I cave your face in. The masked villain was unbothered by the death threat, as with a single touch, Midoriya was compressed into a marble. Midoriya was in an induced coma, functionally. He tried to wake up, but no matter what, he couldn't find a light to start going to. He was stuck. With no other options, he went to the only person that could help him at this point. Himself. Thank you all for indulging yourselves in all this information thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Now there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, I'd like to thank our patrons. BD Flames, Ethan Davis, Terry Chill, Shifter Meals, Adam Zagel, Zill, XAV Beat 03, and Joshua Phelps. Secondly, I'd also like to thank all of our YouTube members. Toei Acosta, Rob the King, Sith Lord 906, CF2364, and Knuckles, Rimuo Tempest, Angel Juarez, Donald C. Stewart, Bryant Greer, and Demonized Fox. Thirdly, if you're in the mood for some great storytelling, We the Celestials has got you covered. Our We the Celestials My Hero Academia and Naruto What If channels retell the story of their namesake anime with a twist. Check it out if you're interested. Fourthly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details can be found in the description down below. Lastly, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, I'd like to extend an invitation to join the team. The only caveat is that we only accept members who are 16 years and up to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interests by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. We're always looking for new members to join us. Well, that's it from us for today's video. So thank you all for watching, and have a great day.